In this video, we're going to do something slightly different. We had a recent question for one of our users, and we thought because it kind of shows the way to lots of different types of functionality in AdapTable, it'd be worth making a video explaining all the different solutions available to the question. So here on the screen is a question we got. The user says that he has a trade date column in his grid, and then he asks, is there a way that I can set the grid to only show me data from a set recent period of time from that trade date, where I can define what that period is, i.e. only show me trade dates from within the past 45, 60 or 90 days. And then importantly, he goes on to add that he wants this to run automatically without needing to set it manually via a range filter and to keep updating this every day. So to understand the problem, here is a dummy data set. We've added some trade dates and you can see we've ordered them over time. There's 400 rows altogether, and essentially what the user is currently doing is manually, for instance, when he wants 45 days, creating a 45 days filter. So it will almost certainly be something like after. Today's the 3rd of November, so there's 3 days, 31 in October is 34, 11 from September will be the 19th. So if you go back to the 19th of September, there we are, that runs the filter, and you can see at the bottom there's 186 days which are filtered, and that works absolutely fine. But as the user points out, it means tomorrow he will need to then create a new filter for the 20th and etc, etc. So it's not really a very sustainable long-term solution. So the question is, what can AdapTable do to help? And actually there's a number of things we can offer, and we'll look at them kind of in turn through this video. So the first thing which can be done, let's clear this filter, is instead of using one of the filters which AdapTable provides, is to use a custom filter predicate. You can see it here. And in this custom predicate, we've created one called last 45 days. So these are predicate definitions that the developer supplies at design time, available to the user at runtime. And if we look at this, we can see that it's got a label, last 45 days. We say where it can be used, so it can either be columns or data types. Here we've said any date column can use it. And we've also said it's not going to be available just for filtering, but actually also for alerts, flashing cells, format columns. And most importantly, we provide a handler function. This is the function that actually does the heavy lifting. In this case, it gets a date and it checks whether that date is within the last 45 days from today. And this is evaluated by AdaptableQL each time the predicate is evaluated. So essentially, if we go back to our grid and we now run this custom predicate last 45 days, we get the same response, 186, because there's 186 rows in our grid that run that filter. And then if I unsort this and then I want to reuse this predicate, because remember we said the predicate isn't just available in filter, it's available elsewhere such as format column. So we can see how to do that. I can go into format column, I can go to trade date, and then when I do the condition, when I choose my predicate, I have a predicate called last 45 days, and I can give that a particular style. And you can see, well, at the moment obviously they're all there, but when I get rid of it, only the ones which hit the predicate have that style. Let's clear that. So that's one way of doing it. But if we go back to the user's question, he says he wants for 45, 60 and 90 days. So obviously it is possible to provide 3 custom predicates, but then obviously if you want 120 days or you want a different date, it becomes difficult. So the way to do that is actually to provide a separate, or a second, or in fact a superior custom predicate definition. And this one is called previous days. And the main difference between them is this line here, inputs. So essentially we're telling the definition that this is going to expect a number, and then that number comes into the params that the predicate receives, and we use that here. So instead of hard coding 45 like we did here, we use that here. And what that means then, obviously, you can give it any number. So if we go back to our grid and we run the second custom predicate, we provided previous days. This time we now get an input because it knows it needs an input from the definition. And when we do 45, again, we get the same 186. And again, I can use this if I want to filter So if I want to do a different format column, again on trade date, and again, this time to use the previous days, now again it adds an input because it knows it's a number. So I type in 45, let's make the fore colour to be brown, and now all of these are brown, and again when I clear it, only those that match are brown. So that's a nicer way of providing what the user wants, because you can then easily switch between days. But in fact, there's another way of doing it, which is not to use predicates at all, and that is to use what's called a query. AdapTable has this ability for you to write your own queries. Again, they're also evaluated by AdapTable QL. So we're going to run a query, and it's a Boolean because obviously it has to return true, false. And there's actually a couple of different ways of doing it. So the first is, because there's lots and lots of functions in here, so one thing you can do is you can do add days. So for instance, if we want to add days, and you can see it takes 2 inputs. So the first one would be trade date, and then the second one would be 45. And then we want to see if that total is greater than, and then we've got another function called today. So we're saying, give me the rows where trade date plus 45 is greater than, sorry, not greater than today, that doesn't make, yeah, that'll be greater than today. And then I run that, and again, obviously, I see those 186. So they're the, that's one way of doing it through a query. You can actually use some different functions, because there's so many different functions that we provide here. And again, you can provide your own functions. So in fact, probably a nicer way I think of doing it would be to use diff days. And diff days, again, it takes 2 dates. So here it would probably want to pass today in as the first one. And then the second one will be the column we're interested in, which is the trade date column. And in this case, obviously, it does need to be less than 45. So we're saying, where is that diff? And again, if I run that, I get 186. And what's nice is that you can save this as a query. So for instance, we can give this a name. So we can call this last 45 days. And now I can clear that. Anytime I want, I can load my last 45 days query, get my 186 columns, or in fact, I can format the column. So let's suspend the one we did before. Let's create a new one. This time it will be the whole row, and this time the condition can be, if you wanted to, you could write the query again, but because we have it as a named query, I just need to pass that in as query last 45 days, and then I can give that a style. So I can say kind of just make them all yellow, and again, you've got all the ones which match in yellow. So they're the 2 main ways of being able to provide the user with what he wants, being able to either use a predicate or a query. And in fact, there's lots of other things you can do if you want to get very complicated. For instance, we ran this query before. Let's open up our query. And here we had to kind of hard code 45. But in fact, that you can actually use what's known as a var. So essentially, we created, in fact, before I show you, let's show you in the code. So in our code, we've created something called active trading period, which is 45. In the real world, you might want to give that a function of, because it can take something from somewhere else. But essentially, that's now available. So when I go here, I've got my var active trading period. It's actually quite hard to get to because it's right at the bottom. Let me just write it. Var active trading period, and then it basically obviously runs exactly the same thing. So different ways of being able to provide what the user requested, a way of easily filtering your grid to show rows or columns which match the date period. I hope that was interesting, hope that was useful. As always, if you'd like to know more about AdapTable, please get in touch and we'll be delighted to show you even more features in the product. Thank you for watching.